Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a massive half-million-year-old biological mystery. Why on earth do our brains pick a dominant hand before we even take our very first breath? It's something so fundamental to who we are, yet the reasons behind it are incredibly complex and deeply rooted in our ancient past.
Okay, think about this massive evolutionary paradox. If right-handedness is the clear, overwhelming human default, why hasn't the left-handed minority just vanished over evolutionary time? I mean, usually when a trait is a disadvantage in a world built for the majority, natural selection just phases it out. But that absolutely didn't happen here.
To figure out why, we're going to walk through the half-million-year mystery, the cross-wired brain, the combat advantage, living in a right-handed world, the left-handed supercomputer, and finally, surviving the stigma. Let's get right into it. Starting off with Section 1, the half-million-year mystery.
So here's the crazy thing. If you're a lefty, you make up roughly 1 in 10 humans. And amazingly, this exact 10% ratio has held totally steady for at least the last 500,000 years. Think about that for a second. No human population anywhere on Earth has ever been mostly left-handed, and no other animal, not even chimpanzees, shows this strong of a species-wide preference.
And we know this goes way, way back. Archaeologists can literally see it in ancient skeletons because the dominant arm bones are denser. But the behavioral proof is what's truly mind-blowing. From 2-million-year-old Homo habilis all the way to 130,000-year-old Neanderthals, we find tiny diagonal scratches on their front teeth from where they gripped an animal hide with their mouth in one hand and scraped it with a stone tool in their right hand. Even in ancient cave paintings across the globe, artists blew pigment over their left hand because they were using their steadier right hand to hold the pigment tube. The fossil record is incredibly consistent here.
Which brings us to Section 2, the cross-wired brain.
Now you might be thinking, isn't this just genetics? Well, not entirely. Identical twins share the exact same DNA, but they can actually have different dominant hands. But genetics definitely load the dice. If both your parents are right-handed, you have that standard 10% chance of being a lefty. But if both your parents are left-handed, boom, your odds jump up to 26%.
So how does this genetic lottery actually work? Scientists believe there isn't actually one single left-handed gene. Instead, it's about a genetic instruction they call the right shift. Since our brains are actually cross-wired, meaning your left hemisphere controls your right side, this right shift tells the brain to neatly pack dominant hand control, tool use, and language all into the left hemisphere. If you get that instruction, you're right-handed. But if you lack it, your brain doesn't get a clear command, so it just kind of leaves your body to pick a side by chance.
Let's move on to Section 3, the combat advantage. If it's really just left up to chance for some folks, why doesn't that 10% demographic eventually drop off? Enter the immense evolutionary advantage of being rare. In head-to-head competition, like boxing, baseball, or mixed martial arts, left-handers win significantly more often. And it's not because they're physically stronger. It's a strategic superiority built entirely on surprise. A right-handed fighter spends all day training against other right-handers. The reflexes are completely tuned for expected angles. But when a lefty steps into the ring, everything is mirrored. That right-hander is suddenly off by a fraction of a second. And in a fight, that's literally the difference between landing a punch and eating one.
But obviously, life isn't all about fighting. Let's look at Section 4, a right-handed world.
Because life is also about cooperation, and that is where the evolutionary balance point strikes. Think about scissors, can openers, or those terrible school desks. If you're a lefty, you absolutely know the struggle. Whenever we share tools or try to learn a skill from someone else, society is distinctly designed for the right-handed majority. Simple cooperative acts become incredibly frustrating when you're constantly having to translate a right-handed world into a left-handed motion. Just look at an individual sport like golf, where you're playing against the course instead of facing off directly against an opponent. Here, the number of left-handers drops to just 4%. Why? Because that combat advantage, that element of surprise, is completely gone. Instead, the severe disadvantage of finding right-handed coaching and using right-handed equipment takes over. So that 10% global average we see everywhere, it is literally the mathematical balance point between the advantage of being rare in combat and the disadvantage of living in a cooperative, right-handed society.
Let's dig a bit deeper into the neuroscience in Section 5, the left-handed supercomputer.
Beyond just tools and sports, a left-handed brain fundamentally organizes information differently. In most right-handed people, the two halves of the brain divide up work super strictly. Language is almost completely on the left side, while spatial awareness is on the right. But for lefties, it's a lot less strict. A left-handed person's brain is often cross-wired to share tasks across both hemispheres.
Because the work is so spread out, lefties actually have slightly faster communication speeds between the two halves of their brain. And here's a massive structural advantage. If a lefty suffers damage to the speech center of their brain, they can often recover their language skills much quicker than a right-hander. Why? Because that other hemisphere is already somewhat used to processing language and can just step right in to help out.
The brilliant British psychologist Chris McManus hit the nail on the head when he said, "A left-hander's brain is just a little more spread out, less strict about which side does what." Now, this doesn't necessarily mean lefties have superpowers, but across the whole population, their brain wiring really is just a bit more flexible and adaptable. It's a truly fascinating neurological trade-off.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, Surviving the Stigma. Despite all these incredible biological adaptations, human culture has historically been absolutely brutal to this 10%. Language itself is packed with deep historical bias. Just look at this. The Latin word for left is sinister, which literally evolved to mean evil. The French word gauche means clumsy or socially awkward. And in English, the right hand means skillful, and being right literally means you are correct. For centuries, culture viewed left-handedness as a moral failing rather than just biology.
And that stigma made growing up incredibly tough. The school and social adaptation processes for left-handed kids were honestly cruel. For centuries, teachers would physically tie kids' left hands behind their backs. Parents would literally slap pens out of their hands to force them to switch. It was widely treated as a defect well into the 1960s. But you know what? It almost never worked because the brain had already locked in its choice back in the womb. The brain flat out refused to negotiate with societal pressure.
The hand you naturally reach out with, the one you write with, it's older than human civilization. It is older than language itself. This ancient half-million-year-old trait is absolutely not a mistake. It is this perfectly tuned evolutionary equilibrium between our need to cooperate and share tools and our fierce need to compete and survive.
So, I'm going to leave you to ponder this final thought. If the human brain stubbornly refused to negotiate away this trait for 500,000 years, enduring all that stigma, all the inconvenience, and a completely right-handed world, is the survival of the left-handed minority actually evolution's brilliant way of making sure humanity is all this ready for a punch we didn't see coming? Thanks for tuning into this explainer and keep questioning the world around you.